Engineers failed to restart a carrier engine. Then the Admiral called in a legendary Navy veteran. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. The hum of the carrier's engine was all that could be heard on the tarmac. A sleek, massive warship sat immobile on the water, its crew of engineers scattered across the deck, their faces drawn with frustration. The ship's engines were dead, and the countdown to an important mission was ticking away. The engineers, all young and confident in their training, stood around the engine room, checking systems and running diagnostics, but nothing seemed to work. They tried everything. The digital meters were green, all indicators said it should work, but the engine refused to turn over. Sweat beaded on their foreheads as the sun beat down. One technician, a young man in his 20s, slammed his fist on a control panel, cursing under his breath. "This is impossible," he muttered. "Everything's perfect. Why isn't it starting?" A senior technician approached, looking over the young man's shoulder. He let out a frustrated sigh. "It doesn't make sense. All the systems are functioning, but the engine refuses to cooperate." A few other engineers gathered around, speaking in hushed tones. There was an underlying unease. They knew the stakes. This was a Navy aircraft carrier, the pride of the fleet. It was supposed to be ready for any situation, but now, it was grounded, and no one had an answer. The young technician, desperate for a solution, looked around. "Maybe we should call in someone from higher up, get some extra hands," he suggested, but his voice was unsure. Another engineer shook his head. "We've done everything by the book. This has to be something we've missed, some minor issue." The tension was palpable. Time was running out, and the crew felt the weight of their failure. As the minutes ticked by, a voice broke through the frustration. "What's the holdup here?" The voice belonged to Captain Thomas, the ship's commanding officer. He walked onto the deck, his presence commanding instant attention. He was an imposing figure, tall, with broad shoulders, his eyes sharp and clear. The engineers stiffened at his approach. "We've tried everything, Captain," one of the engineers said. "It's just not starting." The captain's eyes narrowed. "How long has this been going on?" "Over an hour now, sir," the engineer replied, nervously wiping his brow. The captain exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation clearly starting to settle on him. "Get it fixed, or this mission is off," he said, his voice unwavering. With that, he turned sharply and walked back towards the command center. The engineers exchanged worried glances. They'd exhausted every option they knew. But as they scrambled for answers, the ship's commander, Admiral Harris, a seasoned officer known for his calm under pressure, stepped onto the deck. He surveyed the scene with a sharp gaze. "What's the situation?" he asked. One of the engineers quickly filled him in, explaining the failed attempts to restart the engine. Admiral Harris nodded thoughtfully. "Get me the legendary Navy veteran now," he said, his voice firm. The engineers were taken aback. "The veteran, sir?" one of them asked. "The one who fixed things during the war." The Admiral gave a sharp nod. "Yes, he's the only one who might be able to get this ship moving again. Call him." A few engineers exchanged uncertain glances. They had heard the stories about the veteran, a man who had served in the Navy during some of the toughest battles, and whose expertise with military machinery had become the stuff of legend. But they had never worked with him. His methods were unconventional, and his background was mysterious. The Admiral, undeterred, turned to leave. "Time is running out. Bring him here now." The engineers wasted no time. They picked up the phone and called the veteran, hoping that, against all odds, he would be able to do what no one else could. Meanwhile, the Admiral returned to the command center, his mind already running through contingency plans. He knew the weight of what was at stake. This wasn't just any mission, it was one that could change the course of history. The phone call was made. The legendary Navy veteran was on his way. The phone call was made. The legendary Navy veteran was on his way. As the engineers continued their attempts to fix the engine, a thick tension hung in the air. They knew time was against them, and every second that ticked away made the situation more dire. The ship was supposed to leave in just a few hours, and the mission they were preparing for was critical. No one spoke as they worked. each man and woman lost in their own thoughts, the silence only broken by the occasional clank of tools and the hum of the dead engine. A few minutes later, the sound of a car engine echoed through the tarmac. The engineers looked up as an old, beat-up truck slowly pulled up to the ship. The veteran had arrived. He stepped out of the truck, his frame tall and wiry despite his age. His face was weathered, with deep lines etched from years of experience and hard work. His clothes were simple, jeans and a faded military jacket, but there was no mistaking the way he carried himself. He had an aura of quiet confidence, a man who had seen it all and remained unshaken. The engineers exchanged uncertain glances. This was the man they had been called in to save the day, but what if he couldn't fix it? What if he couldn't even get the engine started? The veteran didn't waste any time. He walked past the engineers without a word, heading straight for the engine room. His movements were calm, measured, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. He glanced at the machine for a moment, then began pulling tools from his worn leather bag. "I know what you're doing wrong," he said, his voice low and steady, not loud enough to command attention, but strong enough to demand respect. The young engineer, who had been leading the effort, stepped forward. "I don't mean to be disrespectful, sir, but we've tried everything. We've checked the diagnostics, the fuel systems, the electrical components. There's nothing wrong." The veteran didn't look up. "Sometimes the problem isn't in the diagnostics," he said. "Sometimes it's something simpler, something the machines can't detect." The engineer frowned. "What do you mean?" The veteran stood still for a moment, his hands resting on the engine. He closed his eyes, listening. He could feel the pulse of the machine, the slight vibrations that the engineers had missed. "This engine's been working too hard," he muttered. "It's not broken. It's just tired." The young engineer didn't understand, but he was beginning to feel a sense of unease. The veteran's calmness was disorienting, almost as if he knew something they didn't. "What do you need us to do?" the engineer asked. "Step back," the veteran replied. The engineers hesitated for a moment, then complied, stepping back to give the old man space. He knelt by the engine and began his work, his hands moving with precision and experience. It was clear that this wasn't his first time dealing with a malfunctioning engine. He tapped a few places on the engine with a wrench, then paused. He closed his eyes again, listening intently. The air seemed to shift as the veteran focused, his entire being in tune with the machine. The engineers watched in silence. There was something about the way the veteran worked that felt different from the frantic, technical approach they had taken. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't yelling at the machine. He was simply listening. A few minutes passed, and then the veteran finally spoke. "It's the cooling system. It's clogged. Not enough airflow." The engineers exchanged confused looks. They had checked the cooling system, hadn't they? The veteran stood up and turned to the team. "Give me a wrench, and I'll show you." With hesitant hands, the young engineer handed him the tool, still unsure of what was going to happen next. The veteran worked quickly, loosening the bolts and removing the casing around the cooling system. As he pulled it away, a cloud of dirt and grime spilled out. He wiped his hands on his pants, then nodded. "This is why it won't start," he said. "It's been running too hot. The engine needs a break." The engineers stared in disbelief as the veteran began to clear the clog, using a simple tool and method they hadn't even considered. It wasn't some high-tech diagnostic tool that would pinpoint the issue. It was experience, something that couldn't be measured by any modern machine. As the veteran worked, the engines of the ship rumbled to life. The sound filled the air, growing louder and louder, as if the ship itself was waking from a deep sleep. The veteran stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. "There," he said, his voice steady. "That should do it." The engineers stood in awe, their jaws slack. The ship's engine, which had been silent for hours, now roared to life. The young engineer who had doubted the veteran stepped forward, his eyes wide. You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. The veteran nodded, then turned to the Admiral, who had been watching from a distance. "It was nothing," he said with a shrug. "Just an old man who knows how to fix things." The Admiral smiled, his respect for the veteran growing. "Not just anything, my friend," the Admiral said. "You just saved this mission." As the engine roared to life and the ship began to prepare for departure, the veteran stood quietly to the side, his work done. He didn't need accolades. He didn't need praise. All he needed was to know that the job was done, and that his country's ship was ready to set sail once again. As the ship's engine roared to life, the hum of power reverberated through the air, the mission now back on track. The veteran, who had quietly solved what had seemed like an insurmountable problem, stood on the edge of the deck, watching as the crew went into action. The engines were humming, the crew moving with purpose. The air had changed, filled with the energy of a task about to be completed, and the veteran, despite the chaos around him, remained as still as a rock. He had done his part, and now, it was up to the rest to carry it through. Admiral Harris, who had been watching the scene unfold, walked over to the veteran with a look of deep respect. The young engineers, still in shock at how the veteran had managed to restart the engine, were beginning to gather around, whispering amongst themselves. They had never seen anything like it. "You've done it again," Admiral Harris said, his voice carrying the weight of admiration. The veteran gave a simple nod, not one for words or praise. "Just doing my job," he replied, his voice calm, almost as if the task had been nothing more than a regular day's work. The Admiral smiled, his expression softening. "Your job is what saved this mission. We're not just talking about a ship here. We're talking about the security of our people." The veteran said nothing, his gaze moving back to the crew working in the distance. His mind was elsewhere, not on the praise, but on something deeper. The Admiral followed his gaze, knowing there was more to this man than just technical expertise. "I don't know if I ever told you, but we've been lucky to have you on board," Harris continued. The veteran didn't respond immediately. He had heard these words before, from other men in high command. They all spoke the same, yet none of them truly understood the man standing before them. This wasn't about luck. It wasn't even about skill. It was about a bond forged in the crucible of war, a connection that could never be broken. Finally, after a long pause, the veteran spoke. "I've been fixing machines since I was a boy," he said, his voice low. "But it's never just about the machine. It's about the people. Machines break, but people, they rely on you." The Admiral, for the first time, saw a glimmer of something more in the veteran's eyes, something that went beyond the mechanical precision, beyond the battlefield victories. It was the weight of years of service, the burden of knowing that sometimes, what you do isn't just about saving a ship or a crew, but about saving lives. The Admiral's expression softened. "You're right. You've never just fixed machines. You've saved people too." Before the veteran could respond, a young officer walked up, his uniform crisp and his face tense. "Sir, the ship's cleared for departure. Everything is in order." The Admiral nodded, his face hardening as the mission ahead became clearer. The veteran, however, stood silently to the side, his mind already shifting to the next task. As the crew began to prepare for departure, the Admiral turned to the veteran one last time. "I know you don't need any ceremony, but it's about time we recognized what you've done for this fleet." The veteran shook his head. "Recognition isn't why I'm here, Admiral," he replied simply. The Admiral's lips pressed into a thin line. He had known men like this before, men who would never seek praise, who would never stand in the spotlight, but who were the backbone of everything the military stood for. He couldn't help but admire the humility. "You're not here for recognition, but I am," the Admiral said, his voice unwavering. "You've given everything for this country. It's time we gave something back." The veteran looked at him for a moment, his expression unreadable, before finally nodding. "Do what you need to do, Admiral," he said, and with that, he turned, walking away from the bustling crew without another word. The Admiral watched him go, the weight of his service pressing down on him. The ship was ready to sail, and the veteran, as always, was already thinking ahead. As the carrier pulled away from the dock, cutting through the waters with a powerful roar, the crew knew that they had just been part of something much bigger than themselves. The veteran had once again proven that no matter the odds, he could fix what others thought was broken. And as the ship sailed toward its next mission, one thing was certain. The legendary Navy veteran had earned his place in history, not for the recognition, but for the lives he had saved and the legacy he had built with his hands and heart. As the carrier sailed smoothly through the waters, the crew couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The engine that had once failed, that had been on the brink of sabotaging the mission, was now roaring to life with a power and precision that seemed impossible just hours before. The young engineers, who had doubted the old veteran's ability, now stood silently by the railings, watching the wake of the ship trail out behind them, their faces filled with a quiet reverence. They had seen firsthand what true expertise looked like, and they knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. As the ship moved further from the harbor, the Admiral remained on the bridge, his mind focused on the mission ahead. But there was a lingering thought that wouldn't leave him. The veteran had done more than fix an engine. He had rekindled something deeper within the crew. For the first time, they had seen someone who was not driven by the urgency of technology, but by experience, patience, and a quiet strength. The Admiral glanced out over the water, lost in thought. The crew was working efficiently now, but the real test lay ahead. There would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome, and the veteran wouldn't be there to fix everything. The Admiral's eyes shifted to the distant horizon, where the sky met the ocean. "Sir, the mission briefing is ready," a voice interrupted his thoughts. The Admiral turned to see his executive officer, Commander Foster, standing in the doorway. "Very well," the Admiral said, nodding. "Let's proceed." As the two of them entered the briefing room, the energy in the air shifted. The room was filled with the ship's senior officers, all focused on the task at hand. The mission ahead was critical, an operation that could change the course of history. Yet, even among these seasoned men and women, the events of the past few hours hung in the air like a heavy cloud. The veteran, whose name remained an enigma to most of them, had done something that couldn't be quantified in a mission report or a set of data. He had reminded them of something they had all but forgotten. True service wasn't about accolades or recognition. It was about doing what needed to be done, no matter the odds. The Admiral took his seat at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the room. "All right, people," he began, his voice steady and commanding. "This mission will test every one of us. But we're ready. We've trained for this. We've seen the worst, and we know how to handle it." As he spoke, his eyes briefly flickered to Commander Foster, who nodded in agreement. But the Admiral knew that their confidence wasn't just from training. It was from something deeper, something intangible. The veteran had given them that, in a way. The crew had been tested, and they had passed. Now, they were ready for the next phase. As the briefing continued, the Admiral remained quietly observant. He knew the stakes. The mission was critical, and it would require every ounce of their skill and resolve. But there was a sense of calm now, a belief that no matter what happened, they had what it took to succeed. After the briefing, as the crew dispersed to prepare for the operation, the Admiral found himself back on the deck. The sun was beginning to set, casting an orange glow across the ocean. The ship was a well-oiled machine now, and the veteran's work was done. The Admiral stood at the edge of the ship, looking out over the water. It was a strange feeling, standing there alone, surrounded by so much power, knowing that it all came together because of one man's quiet expertise. The veteran was gone now, off the ship and into the shadows where he preferred to be. But the impact he had made would stay with the crew, the ship, and the Admiral. Long after they reached their destination, for the first time in a long while, the Admiral felt a sense of peace. The ship was on course, and they had a plan. But there was something more, something unspoken, that gave him confidence. The crew had learned a valuable lesson, one that couldn't be taught in a manual or a training session. They had learned the importance of the quiet strength that comes from experience, from having lived through the toughest moments and come out the other side. It was the kind of strength that couldn't be measured, but could be felt. The Admiral turned away from the railing and walked back toward the bridge. The mission lay ahead, and he knew it would be difficult. But in that moment, he felt ready. The ship was ready. The crew was ready. And somewhere out there, the veteran was probably still quietly fixing things, just as he always had. As the ship sailed onward into the night, the Admiral looked out at the stars, knowing that the greatest strength of all was the ability to adapt, to endure, and to do what needed to be done, no matter the cost. The ship continued its journey through the vast expanse of the ocean, cutting through the water with an unmatched precision. The crew was more focused than ever, working together in perfect harmony. They knew the mission ahead was dangerous, but there was a sense of calm that had settled over them, a quiet confidence that had come from the veteran's actions and the lessons he had imparted without ever saying a word. As the ship sailed deeper into hostile waters, the Admiral stood on the bridge, his mind still grappling with the weight of everything that had happened. It wasn't just the engine that had been fixed, it was the morale of the entire crew that had been lifted. They had seen a man who wasn't driven by fame or accolades, but by duty. The Admiral knew that in the coming hours, they would need every ounce of that strength, that quiet resolve. As the operation approached, the crew gathered once again in the briefing room, their faces serious, their movements sharp. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. The Admiral stood at the head of the table, his expression hardening as he addressed his crew. "This mission is critical," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "We are operating in enemy waters, and every decision we make counts. But we've learned something over the past few days. We've learned that no matter how advanced our technology, no matter how much we train, it's our people that make the difference. And it's time for us to show the world what we're made of." The crew nodded, their faces set with determination. The Admiral turned to his executive officer, Commander Foster, who was ready with the mission details. "Sir," Foster began, "we've confirmed the coordinates of the target. It's a high-risk operation, but we've trained for this." The Admiral gave a sharp nod. "Then let's move out." As the briefing ended and the crew dispersed, the tension began to mount. The ship's crew worked with methodical precision, preparing for the mission ahead. The veterans' influence was evident in the calm way they moved, the confidence that came from knowing they were part of something bigger than themselves. Meanwhile, the veteran, who had been quietly observing from the shadows, knew that his role in this mission had come to an end. He had fixed the ship, given the crew what they needed, and now, it was their turn to carry the weight. The Admiral noticed the veteran standing by the railing, watching the preparations with a distant look in his eyes. "You've done more than enough," the Admiral said, approaching the old man. The veteran didn't respond at first. He simply nodded, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "You're a legend," the Admiral continued, "and this crew wouldn't be here without you." The veteran turned his head slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied the Admiral. "I've been fixing things for a long time," he said softly. "But this ship, this crew, they don't need me anymore. They've got each other." The Admiral paused, his eyes flickering with understanding. "And you've given them the strength to believe in that." The veteran didn't reply. He simply turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the quiet of the ship. As the mission neared, the crew gathered on the deck, ready for what was to come. The ship was moving with precision, the hum of its engines a constant reminder of the hard work that had gone into getting them this far. But there was something more now. It wasn't just the technology or the training, it was the spirit of the crew that would carry them through the most difficult moments. As they moved deeper into enemy territory, the Admiral stood at the helm, his mind focused, his eyes scanning the horizon. He knew the danger they faced, but he also knew that they were ready. The crew, the ship, and even the old veteran had prepared them for this moment. They were no longer just following orders. They were a team, a unit that was unbreakable, no matter the odds. As the ship moved toward its destination, the Admiral thought of the veteran, of the quiet man who had shown them all what it meant to serve with honor, to give without expecting anything in return. The veteran's influence would stay with them long after the mission was over, a reminder that true strength wasn't in the machines or the weapons. They were in the people who operated them. With that thought, the Admiral turned back to his crew, his expression resolute. The mission was about to begin, and they were ready. The mission was underway, and the atmosphere aboard the carrier had shifted to one of focused intensity. Every crew member, from the officers on the bridge to the sailors in the engine rooms, was moving with purpose. The last few days had brought with them challenges that could have broken the spirits of any other crew, but not this one. This crew had been tested, and they had risen to the occasion. The veterans' influence had not only fixed the ship's engine, but had rekindled something within them all, a belief in themselves, in their unity. The Admiral stood at the bridge, watching the vast ocean ahead, his mind calculating every move, every strategy. The ship's destination was clear, a mission of immense importance that could alter the course of the conflict. Yet, despite the critical nature of their mission, there was a quiet calm among the crew. They were ready. They had been prepared not just by technology or tactics, but by the veteran's example, a man who had seen war, who had faced the impossible, and who had always found a way. As the ship made its way closer to its objective, the Admiral knew that the Real challenge was just beginning. The danger that lay ahead was real, but it wasn't the first time he had faced such peril. What mattered now was that his crew understood what was at stake. They had learned that in the most dangerous of times, it wasn't about the machines or the weapons. It was about the people behind them. They had seen the veterans' unwavering determination and had learned to emulate it. Their task now was to face the unknown with the same resolve. The days that followed were filled with preparation. The crew worked tirelessly, checking and rechecking equipment, running simulations, and strategizing. The ship's weapons systems were tested, and every inch of the vessel was inspected for potential weaknesses. The Admiral moved through the ship, speaking to his officers, offering guidance, but also leaving them with the freedom to act on their own. He trusted them, just as he trusted the veteran. As night fell, the ship sailed deeper into the heart of enemy territory. The lights aboard the carrier remained dim, the atmosphere tense but controlled. Every member of the crew knew the mission was about to become very real. As the carrier moved closer to its target, the Admiral met with his senior officers in the operations room. The plan was set. The timing had to be precise. They would have one chance, and that chance was now. "This is it," the Admiral said, standing in front of the map, his finger tracing the path to their target. "We strike fast, we strike hard, and we get out before they know what hit them. Any hesitation could cost us everything." His voice was steady, his presence commanding. It was the same confidence he had carried when they were stranded with a dead engine. They were no longer the crew that had struggled to start the ship. They were a unit, a force ready to face whatever lay ahead. The crew was positioned, and the carrier's jets were prepared for launch. The entire ship was a well-oiled machine now, operating with the kind of synchronization that only comes from facing real adversity. The Admiral stepped back from the map, giving his final orders. "We execute this flawlessly. No mistakes." The tension in the room was palpable, but there was a sense of unity, a belief that they could pull off the impossible. The mission was underway. As the pilots climbed into their jets, the crew watched them go, their hearts in their throats. The veteran, who had quietly observed the preparations from the sidelines, walked up to the Admiral on the bridge. "You've done well," the veteran said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of experience. The Admiral nodded, though his mind was still focused on the mission. "We're not out of the woods yet," he replied. "There's still a long way to go." The veteran smiled faintly. "It's always been that way," he said. "The difference is, now you have a crew that believes." The Admiral looked out over the water, the horizon growing ever closer. He could feel the weight of the mission ahead, but also the strength of his crew, the strength that had been instilled by the veteran's quiet example. "Thank you," the Admiral said, the words carrying a deep respect. The veteran didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, blending once again into the background, just as he always had. The Admiral watched him go, his mind filled with gratitude. Without the veteran, none of this would have been possible. The ship surged forward, cutting through the waters with the kind of determination that could only come from facing impossible odds. The crew was ready. The veteran had given them what they needed, and now they would take the next step. As the jets soared into the sky, the carrier moved ever closer to its target, the crew united and resolute, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The veterans' influence was felt in every action they took, a quiet reminder that in the end, it was the strength of the people that made all the difference. The air was thick with tension as the ship sailed deeper into enemy waters, the stakes higher than ever. The crew had been on edge for hours, waiting for the final command to launch the strike. The Admiral stood at the bridge, his face set in stone, eyes scanning the horizon, aware that every second counted. His mind flashed back to the veteran's words, the quiet strength he had shown in the face of impossible odds. It was that same strength the Admiral needed now to carry the crew through the upcoming challenge. The jets were prepped, the weapons locked, and the entire ship was on full alert. The Admiral knew the crew was ready, but he also understood the weight of what lay ahead. He had been in command long enough to know that nothing in war was certain. The briefings had been thorough, the plans well laid, but in moments like these, it came down to instinct, to the ability of each individual to perform under pressure. As the minutes passed, the tension on the ship grew unbearable. The sound of footsteps echoed on the deck as officers moved swiftly to their positions, preparing for the launch. The Admiral's mind was sharp, focused on the task at hand, but part of him remained thoughtful, his eyes drifting toward the back of the bridge. He could feel the veteran's presence, even though the man was no longer aboard the ship. There was a quiet understanding that the veteran had given the crew something that no one else could. The Admiral was about to speak when Commander Foster entered the room, his face taut with concentration. "Sir, the jets are ready. We're clear to launch," Foster reported, his voice steady but laced with the tension of the moment. The Admiral nodded. "Execute," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "Let's show them what we're made of." The order was given, and the carrier's deck came alive with activity. The first jet roared to life, followed by the others, as they shot into the sky with the power of a storm. The sound of their engines filled the air, vibrating through the ship, and the crew stood in awe of their precision. Each jet was a weapon, each pilot a critical part of the mission's success. The Admiral watched the flight path unfold on the screen in front of him, his fingers brushing the map with practiced ease. The operation was proceeding flawlessly, the timing of the strike perfect. Yet, even as he gave the order for the next phase, a strange calm washed over him. The crew had surpassed every expectation, not just in their technical proficiency, but in their unity. They had come together in a way that he had not seen before, just like the veteran had instilled in them. The mission, though far from over, seemed almost destined to succeed. But as the planes neared their target, an unexpected signal lit up the radar screen. The Admiral's eyes narrowed, his instincts kicking in. "What is that?" he asked, his voice tight. Foster leaned in closer to the screen. "It's an enemy defense system, sir. It wasn't on the initial intel." The Admiral's jaw tightened. "I want that system disabled immediately. Move out. The second wave of fighters. We can't afford any surprises." The ship's crew responded swiftly, moving with the kind of precision they had seen only in the most intense operations. Jets peeled off to engage the threat, the carrier's defensive systems coming online. The air around them crackled with the energy of 1,000 moving parts. But it was no longer just the technology that was driving them. It was the unspoken bond between the crew, the trust they had built in each other, and the lessons they had learned from the veteran. On the deck below, the young engineers who had once doubted their ability to fix the ship now worked side by side with the senior officers, coordinating the efforts to keep the ship in peak condition. The engine that had once failed now purred with the kind of power that only the most seasoned veterans could truly appreciate. The veterans' influence was felt in every step they took, from the swift movements of the crew to the quiet determination that radiated from each man and woman. As the jets dove towards the enemy target, the first wave of missiles launched, cutting through the air with deadly accuracy. The Admiral stood at the bridge, his eyes locked on the unfolding action, his mind calculating every move. He had been in command during many operations, but this one felt different. It wasn't the technology or the weapons that made the difference. It was the crew, the people who had been brought together by a single, quiet man. The veteran had shown them what it meant to be a part of something greater than themselves, and it was that knowledge that carried them forward. As the mission continued, the Admiral found himself growing more and more confident. The crew was performing flawlessly, executing the plan with precision. It wasn't just about following orders anymore. It was about the unity that had been forged through hardship, through adversity, and through the strength of a single man's example. The operation ended successfully, and as the crew gathered on deck, there was a palpable sense of accomplishment. The Admiral stood at the front, watching his crew, his heart swelling with pride. They had done it. They had completed the mission. And as he looked at them, he realized something. The veteran had given them the greatest gift of all, the belief in themselves. The crew had succeeded, not just because of their training, but because they believed they could. And that belief, instilled by the veteran, would stay with them long after the mission was over. The operation had been a success, and the mission was now complete. The carrier had returned to open waters, and the crew had just begun to relax, knowing that they had achieved what many had thought impossible. The jets that had launched with precision had now safely returned, their mission accomplished. The ship, once threatened by a mechanical failure, had proven its strength and resilience. As the crew began to unwind from the tension of the mission, the Admiral stood at the bridge, looking out over the ocean. It was a rare moment of peace, one that he knew wouldn't last long. There was always another mission, another challenge, just beyond the horizon. But for now, the Admiral allowed himself a moment to reflect. The ship was on its way back to base, and he had a crew that was stronger than ever before. He thought back to the veteran, The man who had come aboard not for glory, not for recognition, but simply to do his job. The Admiral had known men like the veteran before, but this man was different. He had instilled something in the crew, something that could never be taught in a classroom or a training manual. He had shown them the value of experience, of patience, and of humility. The Admiral was pulled from his thoughts as Commander Foster entered the bridge. "Sir," Foster said, his voice steady. "The debriefing is scheduled for tomorrow, but there's something I think you should see." The Admiral raised an eyebrow, curious. "What is it?" Foster handed him a small file. "It's a report from the operations team. They've compiled the data from the mission, including some footage from the strike. You might want to take a look." The Admiral nodded and took the file. He knew the importance of reviewing every detail, especially after a successful operation. As he skimmed through the report, his eyes paused on a section that caught his attention. It was a series of photos from the operation, each one showing the crew in action. There was one photo that stood out among the rest. It was a shot of the veteran, standing alone on the deck, watching the jets take off. His expression was unreadable, but there was something about it that spoke volumes. The Admiral stared at the photo for a long moment, reflecting on the man who had made all this possible. The veteran had never sought recognition, and yet here he was, captured in a moment that would become part of the ship's history. The Admiral knew that this photo would serve as a reminder of the true power behind the mission. It wasn't the technology, the weapons, or the tactics. It was the people. It was the quiet men like the veteran who had worked behind the scenes, who had made everything possible. As the Admiral looked out over the ocean again, he realized something important. The crew had succeeded not just because they had the right tools or the right strategy, but because they had each other. They had the kind of unity that could overcome any obstacle. And it was the veteran who had taught them that. The Admiral stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the endless expanse of water. He had been through countless operations, countless missions, but this one felt different. It wasn't just the success of the operation. It was the change he had seen in the crew. They were more than just a team now. They were a family. The veteran had left the ship, disappeared back into the shadows, just as he had come. The Admiral had no doubt that the man would never seek recognition or praise. But the Admiral also knew that the legacy of what he had done would stay with the crew forever. They had learned something they would carry with them for the rest of their careers. As the ship continued on its journey, the Admiral felt a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in years. The mission was over, and the crew had proven themselves. They had faced adversity, and they had come out stronger for it. And in the end, it wasn't just the technology, the training, or the equipment that made the difference. It was the people. It was the quiet strength that came from experience, from knowing that no matter the challenge, you could always find a way to overcome it. The ship sailed on, cutting through the water with a new sense of purpose, its crew united in the knowledge that they had not only completed the mission, but had grown. As a team, the Admiral knew that the veteran's influence would continue to resonate with them long after they returned to port. And as he stood at the helm, watching the sun set on the horizon, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lessons learned and the legacy left behind. The ship returned to port several days later, the mission now a part of history. The crew had completed their task with precision, their success a testament to the training and unity they had developed over the past few weeks. The Admiral stood on the bridge, watching as the massive ship docked. The hum of the engines was a comforting sound, but it was the silence of the crew that spoke volumes. They had proven themselves in a way that would forever change the dynamic aboard this ship. As the ship came to a halt, the crew began to disembark. There was no grand celebration, no fanfare, only the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. The Admiral watched them go, his heart swelling with pride. They had done it. They had faced the challenge, and they had emerged stronger. As the crew moved through the docking area, the veteran was nowhere to be seen. He had come, done his part, and left without a trace, just as he always did. But the impact he had left was undeniable. The Admiral couldn't shake the feeling that the veteran's influence would continue to shape this crew for years to come. He had given them more than just a fix for a broken engine. He had shown them what it meant to be part of something larger than themselves, to give without expecting anything in return. As the Admiral walked through the ship's halls, he couldn't help but overhear the conversations of his crew. They spoke in reverent tones about the veteran, about the way he had fixed the engine, yes, but also about the calmness, the quiet authority he had brought with him. It was clear that the veteran had not only restored the ship's engine, but had also restored the crew's sense of purpose. The Admiral made his way to the command center, where the crew was beginning to debrief. The data had been collected, the mission analyzed, and yet, there was an unspoken feeling that lingered in the room. This mission had been different, not just because of the enemy forces they had faced, but because of what they had learned. The crew had been pushed to their limits and had come through stronger. "All right, everyone," the Admiral said, his voice cutting through the quiet room. "This debrief is over. We did what we set out to do, and we did it together. I'm proud of each and every one of you. We've grown as a team, and we're going to take that forward with us. But let's not forget one thing. There's a reason we succeeded, and it wasn't just because of our training or the technology. It was because we had a purpose, and we had someone show us what true commitment looks like." The crew nodded in agreement, their faces serious but filled with understanding. The Admiral took a deep breath, looking out the window at the now still waters of the harbor. "We may never see the veteran again," he continued, "but the lessons he taught us will stay with us forever." As the crew filed out of the room, the Admiral remained behind, lost in thought. He had seen many things in his career, but there was something about the veteran that struck a chord with him in a way that no mission or battle ever had. The ship was ready for the next mission, and so was the crew. But the Admiral knew that they would carry the memory of the veteran with them, always. As the day wore on, the crew went their separate ways, some heading home, others to their next assignment. But one thing was certain. The veteran's influence had left an indelible mark on them all. The Admiral walked the length of the ship one last time before heading to his quarters. The sounds of the crew fading into the distance were comforting, and yet, in the back of his mind, there was a sense of loss. The veteran was gone, and with him, something precious had been taken. But as the Admiral sat down in his quarters and looked out at the darkening sky, he realized that the veteran had given him something far more valuable than a simple repair. He had given him a crew that understood what it meant to be a part of something greater. And for that, the Admiral was eternally grateful. As he lay in bed that night, the hum of the ship's engines serving as his lullaby, the Admiral knew that the veteran's legacy would live on, not in stories told by others, but in the quiet strength of the crew he had left behind. The aftermath of the operation was a quiet one, the adrenaline that had filled the ship's corridors now replaced by an eerie calm. The mission had been successful, and the crew was now back at port, but something had changed in them. They moved with a purpose, their eyes sharper, their postures more confident. They had faced the impossible, and they had triumphed. But it wasn't just the technology or the strategy that had led to their success. It was the quiet, steadfast resolve they had learned to embody. The veteran's influence lingered in every part of the ship. His presence, though no longer physically there, had left an indelible mark on the crew. They now understood what it meant to serve with honor and humility. The Admiral, as he walked through the halls, reflected on how far his crew had come. The ship, once troubled and on the brink of failure, was now a symbol of the power that could come from unity and experience. He had known the veteran's value from the start, but now, after everything, the crew had truly learned it for themselves. The Admiral found himself in his office, sitting in the silence of the room, contemplating the future. He knew the mission was over, but the lessons would stay. The veteran had taught them something that couldn't be measured by any set of metrics or statistics. It wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about being steady, dependable, and always ready to rise when the moment demanded it. His thoughts were interrupted as Commander Foster entered the room, holding a file. "Sir, the final report on the mission has been processed," Foster said, placing the file on the desk. "We've also gathered feedback from the crew about the operation, and they all agree. It was the turning point for them." The Admiral nodded, taking the file, but not immediately opening it. "I'll read it later," he said. "How's the crew?" Foster hesitated before answering. "Better than expected. They're all inspired. They've been working together like never before." The Admiral smiled slightly. "Good. The veterans' lessons are still alive in them." Foster gave a brief nod, then left the room, leaving the Admiral to his thoughts. It was rare for the Admiral to take time to reflect like this, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the crew had changed. They had learned the value of each other's strengths and the importance of every role, from the engineers to the pilots to the deckhands. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about something much deeper, a sense of unity, forged through adversity. As he sat there, a sense of quiet pride washed over him. This ship, this crew, they weren't just going to make it. They were going to thrive. The veteran had been a catalyst, a force that had brought something out of them that they hadn't known they had. And as the Admiral looked out the window of his office, watching the sun set over the harbor, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. It wasn't just about the mission they had completed, but the bond they had built, one that would carry them through whatever came next. The ship was ready for whatever challenge lay ahead. But now, they were more than just a team. They were a family, and nothing could stand in their way. The days following the mission were quieter, yet the ripple effect of the operation continued to shape the crew. The Admiral watched from his office as the ship underwent routine maintenance and preparations for the next task, but there was something different now. The crew worked with more unity, more precision, and a sense of purpose that had been missing before. The veterans' lessons had taken root, and their actions were a testament to that. It wasn't just the technology, the plans, or the tactics. It was the bond that had been forged through shared adversity, through a common goal, and through the quiet strength of a man who had remained unnoticed until the very moment the crew needed him the most. The Admiral leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the reports on his desk, but his mind kept drifting back to the veteran. He hadn't seen him since the operation, and he knew the old man would never seek recognition or glory. It wasn't his way, but that didn't stop the Admiral from feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He owed so much to the veteran. It was because of him that the crew had learned the true meaning of duty and sacrifice. It was because of him that the ship was ready for whatever lay ahead. The Admiral walked out onto the deck, the evening sun casting long shadows across the water. He stood at the railing, watching the waves roll by, lost in thought. A familiar figure approached from behind, breaking the silence. It was Commander Foster, his face a mixture of respect and quiet understanding. "Sir," Foster began, his voice carrying a hint of reverence. "The crew is different now. There's a certain level of confidence and respect between them that wasn't there before. You can feel it in the air. It's as if they've been given a new purpose." The Admiral nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I've noticed," he said quietly. "They've learned something that can't be taught in a classroom. They've learned what it truly means to serve, to give everything for the greater good." Foster hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. "Sir, I never got the chance to thank you for calling in the veteran, for giving us the opportunity to learn from him. I think I speak for everyone when I say that his influence has changed us all." The Admiral turned to face him, his eyes softening. "It wasn't me. It was him. He's the one who showed us what it means to be a true soldier. Not just in battle, but in life. It's something we all needed to see." Foster nodded, then fell silent, the weight of the moment settling over both men. The veteran's legacy had become something far more than a memory. It was a living, breathing part of the crew now, something that would carry them forward into every mission, every challenge that lay ahead. As the Admiral looked out at the ocean, he knew that the veteran's influence would continue to resonate throughout the ship, shaping the crew for years to come. It was a quiet power, a strength that came from experience, from humility, and from an unwavering commitment to duty. And as the ship prepared for its next mission, the Admiral felt a deep sense of peace. They were ready. The crew was ready. And no matter what came next, they would face it together, as a team, bound by the lessons of a man who had walked among them, yet remained a mystery. A man who had been more than just a veteran. He had been a hero, and now, his legacy would live on in the hearts of those who had been fortunate enough to learn from him. This emotional story takes you on a powerful journey of respect, honor, and redemption. It follows the transformation of a crew who learned what true dedication and sacrifice mean, all thanks to a veteran who stepped in at a critical moment. The emotional story begins with a crew struggling with a mechanical failure, leading to a moment of despair, only to be saved by an unexpected, yet legendary veteran. As tensions rise and the crew faces challenges they never imagined, the emotional story unfolds, revealing deep lessons about humility, strength, and perseverance. Through the lens of this emotional story, we see how the quiet strength of one man can turn the tide of a mission and change lives forever. The Admiral, whose crew has grown stronger and more united, reflects on the lessons learned from the veteran's influence. The emotional story culminates in a realization that this was more than a mission. It was a turning point for everyone involved. This emotional story teaches that the greatest strength often comes from the most unexpected sources, and that true honor and respect are earned through actions, not words.